Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. Welcome into another episode of the podcast, everybody. I'm excited. We're doing something a little bit different today because I have a dad here with me today. Mark, who is a member of my dad's coaching group, has generously offered to be a little guinea pig and share a little bit of his insights into what it's like to work with a parenting coach, his experiences of fatherhood and how the group works and all that really good stuff. So it's a little bit different. I'm not going to start us off with a confession the way I usually do. Instead, we're just going to dive right into a chat between me and Mark. So thanks, Mark, for being here.
No, you're welcome. Glad to be here. Thank you.
This is great. So just to give everyone a little bit of background, Mark, tell us a little bit about your family.
Uh, I'm a single father of a 6-year-old beautiful little girl.
Mm-hmm.
Mom and I have been apart for 6 years. So navigating the co-parenting situation over the past 6 years has been very challenging. And then a recommendation of my former attorney and came into my life, and here we are working on my dad's skills, I guess.
Yeah. It's kind of,
Yeah.
it's like all encompassing sometimes, right? Like the working on the co-parenting navigation and then also the parenting stuff between you and your daughter and everything. I think that's pretty normal for all my clients, but I'd love to hear your unique experience of that, however much you want to share with us of how working with me has kind of touched on lots of those different topics, like you said.
Yeah, I think more than anything, when we first started earlier last year, I think it was March, we with the work broke and getting into the program and the tools we can use to help me navigate some severe emotional ups and downs with my daughter. Um, it's been extremely helpful, and I think it's been really even more beneficial for my own emotional ups and downs when it comes to dealing with 2-3 hour tantrums or um,
Yeah, that little girl sure can give you a run for your money every once in a while, eh?
absolutely, yeah.
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 So tell us a little bit about, just your experience. What would be the biggest results you think you've gotten from doing this work?
I think more than anything is being able to emotionally settle down, calm my thoughts, and address those difficult moments with calm. I mean, that's been my ultimate goal through all of this, is to be able to deliberately and intentionally deal with the emotional ups and downs that she's having, and not to engage in her, I guess, her story is what we talked about that quite a bit. Don't engage the story, engage the emotions more than the story, right? Or acknowledge the emotion, acknowledge her feelings, um, love and logic, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I really love is that when I ask you, I think before we start doing this kind of work and we're listening to like, oh, what would be the results of working with a parent coach? We're waiting to hear somebody say something like, oh, my kid is super well behaved and nothing ever bad ever happens and they listen to me every time I talk and we have no tantrums and blah blah blah. What I really love is that, once you get into this work, you had no hesitation, Mark, when I asked you like what were your results. It was results for yourself of you showing up differently, you feeling differently and experiencing stuff differently. But I do think it's important for the listeners to know like you have actually also really created some results with your daughter in terms of her behavior. And I'd love to hear you speak to that a little bit.
yeah, you know, I think June. So this is really a really great example of how far we've come, even in 10 months since this all started with you, or 9 months. June was the last full blown 2-3 hour meltdown during an overnight. So 3 hours of back and forth, and very challenging, obviously, for me and her. That was the last time we had a really long, um, I guess, interaction, I guess you could call it.
Sure. Yeah, so to
And
give
then,
listeners like a little bit of backstory, when you first hired me, I think one of the reasons why you reached out to me was because you were working really hard on having these successful overnights with your daughter, and she was having a really hard time, calming down and staying calm and, being basically accepting of these overnights. And you were, like you said, having these like 2 or 3 hour blowouts and things like that. And also, just for frame of reference, you're talking about the last time you had to deal with something like that being back in June. It is January currently when we're recording this. So that's like a 6 months since you've really had to deal with that kind of stuff, which to me is a tremendous difference from having like every single time you had an overnight having these meltdowns that were hours long to none,
yeah,
have not having them anymore.
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and I mean, recently, a couple weeks ago, we had one that lasted maybe 40 minutes, but we got through it. And it was so interesting to watch because I'm seeing her progression and her development, her maturation over this period of time. And we got through this 30, 40 minute episode, and then it just clicked. So I realized in that moment it was evidence that what we were doing and what I'm doing is working, because she's learning that she has that ability to work through these issues. She's learning that she's going to be okay, and I think a lot of that has to do with her being challenged, obviously, and then my ability to stay calm and acknowledge, validate what she's feeling. And then the hardest part is not engaging in the story, because she's really good at throwing questions out that really are logically make sense. And it's extremely hard to not engage in the story that she's telling me, because it makes sense and she knows it. So that's really, this whole program has helped me kind of detach from this little story that she's got going on in her head, and instead acknowledging and loving her. That's what it boils down to. It's just about love. It is, no matter what. And you just gotta, that's the first thing. You gotta.
That's just, I love hearing you say that. It's just, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of things in relationships that we mistake for love that really aren't love, like codependency and things like that. And part of the work that I love to do with all my clients is to help strip away all of those kind of false flags that we mistake for love, so that we're actually showing up truly attuning to our child. Like you said, validating what she's going through versus trying to make it stop. Being
Mm,
able to actually emotionally attune to your child, that is love. Trying to manage and control and fix your child, it might feel like love, but it's really, really not. And if you really can get back down to that like epicenter, that real kernel of like, what's this really supposed to be about? It becomes a lot easier to, like you said, stay calm, sidestep the story, get
mm,
sucked into the arguments and all of those things. And I think this is something that you and I've talked about several times, where it's like you sometimes don't give yourself the credit of like how far you've come and what a tremendous change that you've made. And the other thing that you said that I just was really just heart touching to me is this: you're able to watch that she is learning this skill, and by you attuning to her and holding your boundaries with her, you are watching her develop her skills and her ability to manage herself and her understanding and all of this stuff. And that is just such a gift to really see, like, oh my gosh, the way I'm showing up as a parent is actually catalyzing my child's growth and development in these really healthy ways. Like it, it's like, oh my gosh, it's happening.
yeah,
It really
yeah,
is.
it sure is. Yeah, yeah,
So
for
I would
sure.
love to kind of a little bit of a change topic here, but something that we're talking about all this month in my business is dads and fatherhood and working with dads. And so I would just love for you to share. And honestly, I have no idea what just for the listener out there, I have no idea what Mark's going to say in answer to this, but I would just love to hear, like, what are your thoughts on, what is unique about fatherhood? Maybe what even surprised you about being a dad? Like, what do you wish the world knew about dads and fatherhood?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Hmm. And from my perspective, um, obviously, I'm a dad of a 6-year-old girl. So, I mean, that's all I know, right? That's all I know. And I know from my own experiences with not having my father around, um, what an impact that had on my life. So that's one of the, I'm not going to be that dad. I'm not that dad. I'm not even close to being that guy, you know? I think, I think it's challenging for dads, single dads to, um, raise daughters. I think I think that's a bit of a challenge because we're men and women, girls and boys are so different emotionally, you know. So having a better understanding of girls in general or women in general, I think is important.
Yeah, so probably in terms of like what was surprising to you about fatherhood, probably like a ton of it because it's all these like insights into what it's like to be a little girl and what it's like to be a daughter and what do girls care about, stuff like that. And, of
Yeah,
course, we can't make too many blanket statements about, oh, girls are this way, boys are that way. But I think for every parent, no matter what gender your child is, it's always a surprise because it's a totally different person than who you are. Right. So it's like, wow, here's
yeah,
a whole different human being that I don't know really, and I'm getting to know, and everything about them is a surprise because it's not the way I see the world, it's the way they see the world. But then when you also take into account the gender disparity, it's also, enlightening in that regard as well.
yeah, yeah. No, that's such a good question. I wish more dads had support. I guess I think single fathers or even single mothers. But this is about fathers, right? You asked me about fathers. I think it's so important that fathers have the support. You know, I mean, like what you're doing. I think it's so important that dads are exposed to these ideas and groups and being able to, get on a Zoom call and have discussions about what's going on. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we can relate and find commonalities, and I think it's so important because we're able to, we're not alone. You know, you're not alone, and when you can get into a group and like our men's group or dad's group and talk to other guys or listen to other dads that are going through similar situations, it really helps put it all in perspective that we're all here, we're all in here trying to be better human beings, better fathers, better parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
I completely, obviously, I agree with that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have started the group. But it's always so gratifying and validating to hear that that's exactly the experience of the group that people are having. That it matters. It matters to know you're not alone. It matters to know that your problems aren't unique. It matters to just know that you have people in your corner, even. And that's something I'm curious about in terms of like the juxtaposition between fatherhood and versus motherhood. Like, how hard or easy has it been for you to find support and find commonalities and make connections with other dads and things like that? What's your experience of that been?
um, well, through our group and meeting you has exposed me to a lot, especially this men's group and our coaching sessions, obviously. Um, and I've met a handful of people around town that are in similar situations. Um,
But what do you think gets in the way of people really investing in support or finding that kind of community? What do you think, or you can speak to your own experience maybe? Like what has been challenging about that for you, or what maybe would have gotten in your way for that?
not even really knowing how to go about it or who to connect with or reaching out to a professional and looking for suggestions. It took me a while to find you, and just got to a point where I was desperate, literally, really desperate. A year ago, even up until that point, I was desperate, but I just reached a point where I needed additional help, and that's when you came along. But I think fathers are kind of overwhelmed. I think, especially in newly separated or divorced situations or whatever the circumstance, I think it's overwhelming, especially with fathers who are working, full time and sharing, co-parenting with their ex or whomever, and just, I think it's overwhelming. I think a lot of fathers are overwhelmed with the entire process, let alone being a parent, going through the entire process.
Yeah. Well, and what I've heard
Yep.
from lots of dads is, well, two things. Number one, barrier to getting support is not really even finding it. Like, I think that most even like parenting books out there, definitely a lot of parenting coaches, support groups, and things like that, they're really geared towards mothers. And so I don't think that there are a lot of groups out there like ours. I think that it's kind of unique. And in fact, even before I started the group, I think it was unique that I even worked with dads at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the other barrier I hear, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because, obviously I'm just um I'm not actually living this experience, but I've heard from a lot of dads this a little bit feeling of a barrier of like societal pressure, like dads are supposed or men are supposed to be able to be strong and figure this stuff out for themselves, and reaching out for support, looking for a coach or something like that. It's not really part of the sort of vision that people have of who they're supposed to be as a man or a dad. I'd love to hear what you think about that, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's a generational thing, right? Where we've been kind of men have been bred to, to be these tough guys and not reach out for help, some sort of vulnerability. I'm not that guy. I, I, I reach out for help, and I think it's important. It's very important to open up and talk to people, especially other dads or people that you can actually relate to. And it's an interesting thing. I think there needs to be a monumental shift in the way men approach parenting or even manhood. You know what I mean?
I
I
could
think
not agree more. And I think I actually, and this is something I was getting at in my last couple episodes, we talked about this in terms of like there are so many dads. Like Mark, you got to meet them in the dads group. There's you're not alone in the sense that like you're not the only dad out there who cares about doing a great job and being a good parent. But um but I think that the kind of the societal message that we're given, or the way that the conventional wisdom is that, whatever, dads are just kind of half-assing it, and moms are the ones who do everything. And, whatever. It's the whole tit for tat mom versus dad thing. It's kind of, I don't know, counterproductive, I would say, but then also it's just simply not accurate. I work with dads all the time who care so deeply about this. And so I think it's not just that we need to have this change. I think also the change is happening, and we need to enable and support and encourage that change. And so something like the group, or, just even having a parent coach, whether it's in a group setting or not, for a dad is part of making that change come to fruition.
Yeah, I agree. Oh
That's
yeah, so much
awesome.
so. Yeah.
So what would you say to any dad out there who's like, I don't know about this? What would you say to a dad who's maybe thinking about the group, not so sure? What was the game changer? What was the clincher for you?
Just when I realized that it was even something that was available, because I've spent time even before you and I met, um, researching groups. And they're hard to find. You know, Maybe I didn't research enough, but it was hard to find. And that's when I reached out and met you. But I think it's one of the most. I look forward to our Wednesday group meetings. I really do. And that's just so important for us fathers, single fathers, whatever the situation, to come together and discuss what we're feeling. I I can't stress that enough. It's been
Yeah, it's
extremely beneficial for me to hear other fathers' viewpoints and their struggles, and it's humbling too, you know, to see other fathers who are hurting, and here we are reaching out and getting help, you know, and it's a manly thing to do. If you're struggling, reach out, you know. It
yeah.
is.
Well, and I think it's important for people to realize, like, what I love listening to you is like, so for anyone who needs the background on this, like Mark has worked with me both privately and in my group setting. And when it's what I'm hearing as you're talking is, well, first of all of the coaching that you've gotten on either platform has helped you create tremendous results with your daughter and tremendous results even just with your own like happiness and peace as a father, but almost that the camaraderie, that additional aspect that you get from the group. So, like, whether you're in the group or whether you're working with me privately, you're going to be getting the same curriculum. You're going to be getting the same parenting skills. You're going to be getting the same coaching from me in terms of like implementation and making sure that you're being accountable and you're troubleshooting these problems with your kids. That's happening no matter what. But the group has offered this additional feature to you, which is that camaraderie and validation and normalization of having a crew of dudes with you. That's you're not the only one. That's something private work just can't simply give you. And as I'm listening to you talk, it almost sounds to me like the group work has been even more valuable to you than the private work because of that aspect that, can't be delivered in any other way.
Yeah, that's so true, and it's because, I mean, obviously the men's group, you've also coached some of those guys, I'm sure, or all of them, I'm not sure, but I know because we talk about some of the same things, but to hear somebody else's perspective, another father's perspective on one of the tools you've taught in the book, or any of the many tools you've taught in the book, and just to have it, you know, portrayed in a real life situation, you know, okay, well, this is what I'm dealing with. So and so is dealing with this problem with one of their childs this week, and then we talk about the tools that you've introduced, and then we have a discussion about it. Then, you know, fathers will have input or not, or will listen, and but I think it's action. It's the tools put into action, and you get to hear about it and talk about it, and then all that information. It's just more data and more information that each of us can use, you know, in a real life situation, because we're listening to other fathers in real life situations use the tools and
Right.
address the problem. But if that
It
makes
reminds
sense.
me of the first time that I ever joined a coaching group. Somebody, one of the things that convinced me to give it a try was somebody saying, when you are listening to other people get coached is sometimes when you have your biggest aha moments because you're not wrapped up in your story and trying to like be engaged and have your defenses up because you're having a dialogue. You're just observing. So you're like super relaxed and open, and you wind up starting to see things and patterns and connections and lessons and things like that in just such different ways because you have that little bit of a buffer, that little bit of a removal, and I see that happen time and time again. But I want to bring it back to the results piece, Mark, because I guarantee there are parents out there, dads or moms, doesn't matter, listening to you and thinking, okay, so you went from hours long blowouts with your daughter to like nothing like that happening at all. Like if you had to give one piece of advice to parents out there who are dealing with like just unbridled tantrums with their
Mm.
kids, what's your secret? How did you make it happen?
I'm still working on it. That's definitely still a process.
Sure.
um, more than anything in the world, I think it's calm. It's in any situation, no matter what it is, just remaining calm and centered. And like we've talked about many times, the boundaries, and figuring out that gray area between boundaries and love. You know, okay, how do you love and keep a boundary, not engage in the story? I think that's the trickiest part, and that's what I've been working on. And to know in the moment when she's having a hard time that I need to stay calm within my with my own within myself has been more beneficial than anything. not.
I love how you said that area with boundaries and love. It's a tricky thing for people, and I know that's something you've worked so hard on, is just being able to stay confident and firm in your boundaries, and implementing that with lots of love, and all the emotion that comes up when you hold a boundary. If that's not your norm, if that's hard for you to do, it starts to feel like maybe you're being quote unquote mean, and things like that. And you don't realize it maybe, but as you're talking, you're literally exemplifying authoritative parenting ticks those two boxes of emotional and attunement and love and connection with your child, plus boundaries and leadership. And
Mm,
exactly what you're describing is that dance that we do as parents of making sure that we're really get ticking both those boxes. We're delivering both of those things for our kids. And I think that was from a coaching perspective, I can say what I saw happening with your work is that you got way, way, way better at turning off the part of you that felt like love, but was actually codependence with your daughter. So that when she
mm,
was upset, it was like ripping your heart apart. And it was so hard for you to hold a boundary and say, you know what? It's an overnight. We're sleeping at daddy's house tonight. And I totally get that you're bummed out about it. And this is what's happening, and I'm happy to talk to you about it once you've calmed down. That was
yeah,
so hard for you to do because you were so worried that, something horrible was going on with her, and that you were a terrible dad, or you were letting her down, or, all these things, these thoughts that run through our heads. So
yeah,
to hear you talk about the way you're showing up right now, which is with much clearer boundaries, much more skill at enforcing and sticking to your boundaries, to hear you talk about that in terms of love, to me is a major win, because it means that you're chipping away at that false narrative that a lot of parents struggle with, which is, if I'm set a boundary, I'm not being loving. I have to
mm,
choose between being mean and being loving. And that's totally a false paradigm. But I'd say like at least half of the parents I work with come to parenting with that paradigm. So to hear you talk about boundaries in terms of love means to me that you are like really working very hard and making major progress on turning that paradigm upside down.
yeah. I am. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're
You've been
welcome.
unbelievable help.
Of course, you're welcome. And I'm just so proud of you and happy for you. And I think it's always talk about this, like the balance or whatever. It's always a balance between like, was I helpful? Yes. And also, I really want you to give yourself credit. Like, you did this, and that's a big deal. Even you did this by hiring me, and you did this by then doing the work and coming to the calls and all of that stuff. And now you
Yeah,
get to reap the rewards of like actually being able to see your daughter like stepping into the next version of herself, becoming this beautiful young lady that she'll become someday, and all of
yeah.
these things. It's all happening, and you made that happen, Mark. So you deserve the most thanks of all.
Uh, you deserve it. Thanks as well. Thank you.
Oh, well, Mark, thanks so much for sharing a little bit of your story with us, and hopefully inspiring some other parents out there, especially around tantrums and finding that inner resolve and working on setting boundaries, and hopefully also in joining our coaching group, because it is amazing. It's an incredible group of dads. I feel super honored to work with all of you guys every week, and I can't wait to see our ranks grow more and more.
Likewise. Let's get to
Awesome.
talking.
I know, it's great. Awesome. So remember everybody that this month of January, there's a really great opportunity for you to get founders pricing and benefits by joining the beta group of our um dad's group. So if you're interested in that, there'll be a link in the show notes, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye everybody. The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long, or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.